Welcome back, everybody. It is Tuesday, so that means, of course, Vetted VA Live. We are going through week number 2 here with a realtor-only panel. And for some reason, Sam Rubin out of Richardson, Texas, decided she didn't want to take part, so she jumped out. I kid. She'll be back here in a second. But I have Alexis Brown in Tennessee, and I have Claudia Morales, who is near me here in Southern California in the Apple Valley area, covering the Inland Empire. So we went through a bunch of stuff last week, primarily focused on buyer side stuff. So we're going to take a little bit more of a focus to the sellers tonight, especially when it comes to the PCS process. So when we did an episode last October, it was really from a buyer's perspective. If you're getting moved, what does that look like? Now, as a seller, you're going to have some unique issues when you're getting moved to a new station and you have to sell that property. So we've got the real estate experts that are going to talk about what you need to know to successfully navigate that process. So here we go. We got Sam back. Sam, I was telling everyone you didn't like us, or maybe you just didn't like being on the top row of video with me. You said, I'm going to bounce and then come back in, and then I don't have to be on that top row with Josh.
Gotcha.
So, hey, before we jump into discussion, again, a reminder for all of you watching at home, our primary purpose here is to answer your questions. So real estate or mortgage related, even though mainly have realtors here tonight, anything about buying, selling, financing real estate that we can answer, jump into the chat. Ask your questions. As soon as we get an appropriate point to break, we'll jump in. But obviously, that is our number one and main purpose here. We're going to cover the topics at hand, but definitely want to get your questions answered. So, Alexis, you have been nominated to kick off the discussion of PCSing from a seller's perspective. What is unique about that process from a seller's side versus, hey, I'm getting shipped across the country or across the world and have to find a house. I'm getting shipped away and I got to get rid of my house. What does that mean for you and the seller?
Okay, so when you're PCSing, obviously that is a permanent change of station. So we're all assuming that you're moving cross country or around the world on military orders. So the first thing is always going to be to kind of line, how's this going to work? Okay, so off the top, we got to talk about POA, because sometimes when you're closing, depending on the state that you're closing in or the country that you're headed to, both spouses are not going to be present to sign closing docs. And this is obviously going to depend on the state and whose name's on the house. Okay. But typically, let's say it's both spouses' names are on the house. Someone's going to want to have a POA very similar to when you purchase a house. A POA specific to that process is going to be needed. Okay. So that's always going to be the first step, is just making sure you align that. Very easy to obtain. Go to an attorney, or you could see Legal on Base. Okay. Next step is going to be, I'd say, about 9 to 6 months, depending on where you're stationed and how the market is moving there. About 6 to 9 months, reach out to a real estate agent, either the buyer's agent that helped assist you when you purchase a home, or else a trusted agent or someone that you know or you've gained to trust there in the community, and kind of go over the process that you're going to need, the steps that you're going to need to take in order to sorry, let me mute my phone, in order to properly get your house sold and closed in a timely manner that align with your PCS needs. So for example, if you are transitioning to a new duty station and you are wanting to purchase a house there, right, your house where you're in your current duty station might need to be sold or at least under contract before you can move on to the next duty station. So talking to a real estate agent early is going to be critical to make sure your house is good to go and checks all the boxes so you can get sold quickly.
And in talking about that process, this market's been a little bit different the last few years in terms of the selling side is fairly easy. The buying side is where it gets a little sticky, finding something to replace it. Is that what you guys are seeing, that sellers not having too much trouble getting rid of a property when they're leaving one location and moving into another, and maybe the up leg of buying their new residence is more difficult for them in the current market?
That depends on the house. So what's working in my market might not be working in other markets, but I can tell you this: whether you are PCSing or you're just a seller wanting to sell your house, interest rates are a little bit high and buyers are picky right now. They're spending a lot more money to get into that house than what you spent most likely to get in it. So clean, light, bright, and airy is my model for what sells a house. People aren't wanting to spend a lot of money on a house that's filthy. So oftentimes homes that are sitting, at least in my area, they're sitting because they have issues. Sometimes it's extremely dated, other times it's just housekeeping.
Well, let's talk about that because you guys are covering pretty much three different corners of the country. We got Tennessee, we got Texas, we got California, and you made a really important point. If you look, we got data from FHFA and Case Shiller today, and you look at different regions of the country, they're all performing differently. We talk about real estate always being local, and
Mm-hmm.
you turn on the news or you pick up the Wall Street Journal and it says this about the real estate market, but you guys are in three very different markets. Claudia, for you in Apple Valley, Southern California, Inland Empire area, how are your sellers faring now? And are you seeing the same thing where they're having to do a little more cleanup, making their house present a little bit better than maybe where we were a couple of years ago when things were flying off the shelf?
I think buyers are being a little bit more picky. Of course, whatever is nice and ready to be moved into is going to get snatched up right away. But I am still seeing properties sitting on the market longer than 30 days. Of course, the condition will help lessen that, but we're also starting to see properties get multiple offers and accepting offers above the asking price.
Is about what you're seeing in Texas as well, Sam?
Yeah, Texas, it really depends on the area. We have areas where houses are sitting for 30, 60 days, and we have some areas where they're going in multiple offer situations. So it's definitely area dependent in Texas.
And I think kind of going back to what Alexis was saying, for my clients, the folks that want the turnkey stuff really pretty, that's ready to go, there's lots of buyers lined up for that. So to the point that if you're a seller and you have a home that isn't quite like that, it's almost like a bell curve. We have very few homes out here that are perfect, look like they're ready for HGTV. You have very few that look like they're ready for hoarders. And then most of them are somewhere in the middle. And how you present your house, the more you can get it to that higher end. How about, why don't each of you kind of walk us through pricing and how important pricing is, because that's what we've been hearing, that from a seller's perspective, if it's priced appropriately, going fairly quickly. But we have sellers who think that the market is still as hot as it was a year or two ago, and they want top dollar regardless of whether they have the top notch condition. How does that match up with your market in Tennessee, Alexis?
So in my market here in Tennessee, often I'm finding myself having to bring sellers' reality back down to a more normal level, right? So we aren't seeing really high prices, but understand that within every market, not just here in Memphis, Tennessee, where I'm at, but in every market, there's different markets within the market, and those different markets vary depending on the price point. So in my market right now, lower end entry level housing is moving kind of regardless of condition. Other price points, not as fast. So trying to decipher what the best price point is going to be to sell someone's house is simply based on what real estate's kind of based on, and that's comps. Okay, that's what it comes down to. So pulling accurate comps both on market and off market listings that have closed within the last 6 months that are closest to the subject property are critical.
With that, Sam, do you have any tactics or tips? Not even tactics in saying of dealing with a seller who may want to price really aggressively, which may paradoxically get them a lower price in the end run. But if you're dealing with someone, a seller, veterans oftentimes have put zero down, have put minimum down. They've moved around a little bit more often, so they have transaction costs. They may have not built up as much equity as a standard traditional seller, and rightfully would want to maximize their equity. How do you go through that conversation when, to the veteran's mind, their thought is, I'm going to list for as much as possible and see what the market does, versus listing appropriately and letting market forces sort of take over from there?
Well, actually, that's a great question because I've had that happen over probably the last 6 months and currently having it happen. But basically, comps is going to speak for itself, for one, in regards to price. And not just that there's comps there to tell you what your price, what the price of what your house is worth, right? You also have to consider the market conditions. So, what I'm seeing in different parts of Texas is even though a house is worth XYZ and you can have an appraisal on it and it's worth that, if the buyers are not willing to pay that at this time, guess what? you're not getting it. So if you have an agent that is aware of what's going on in the markets and the different parts of the market, etc., and they know for a fact that, okay, if you list that market value right now, your house is going to sit. Or let's list it a little bit below market value so we can get some traction and then try to get you that best, highest, and best price, right? So that's a couple of ways that I've tried to, educate sellers on with the current market before you list that market value and bam, house is gone. But we're no longer in that in certain parts of the metroplex. So depending on the metroplex that you are in the areas that you guys live, you want to talk to an agent that is aware of what's going on in that location, because if they're not, and you price it too high, meaning market value, which is too high in some of our markets right now, your house will sit.
So you said something really interesting, talking about an appraisal. And I see this where someone will say, well, the seller had an appraisal 6 months ago, or they did a refinance and it appraised. How often do you guys come across that, Claudia, where a seller saying, well, I have an appraisal in hand, so I know what it's worth? Does that come up often? And how do you handle that in terms of explaining to a seller what the appraisal means versus what the market's telling you?
It hasn't come up lately for me. I know it has in the past, especially when we were in that very hot sellers market. A lot of people took money out and they still had equity. But actually, I would like to go back to the pricing, because Sam said something really, or Alexis, about going back 6 months and looking at the comps. So what I do is we look 90 days at the comps, because that's how quickly things are moving in my market. So if you're looking at something that's over 90 days old, that's not really an accurate reflection of what's going on here. But when we're having the pricing conversation with the seller, I also ask them, what is their timeline? Because depending on if you want to spend more time on the market, then maybe we can try a little bit higher, 5% higher. If you have to leave in 30 days or 45 days, then we can't afford to spend that time to test the market to see what it's going to do, if it's going to get you the additional $5,000 or $10,000. So you really have to decide what's more important. Is it, you might not make $10,000 to $20,000, but you also need to be somewhere at a certain time, or you're traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast and you lose all that travel time when you could be house hunting in your new duty station.
Before we shift off from PCS, and we don't have to leave that discussion behind, because many sellers, veteran sellers, active duty sellers will be in that PCS process. Before we leave that entirely, was there anything that you guys wanted to talk about? Because what I kind of want to transition to is just from primarily an active duty seller. So I guess a question for you guys is: a veteran seller who's separated, no longer active duty, to your end, is there anything that makes them any different than any other seller? Because an active duty seller who's getting PCS'd out, obviously that's a very different situation where you guys have to take a lot into account. If you just come across someone that says, hey, my stepfather just passed away last week, he was a Vietnam veteran. If you had showed up and he says, hey, I want you to list my house, I'm a Vietnam veteran, that really isn't any different than any other seller to my mind. But from you guys' perspective, does a separated veteran, are there any things they should be aware of when selling a home above and beyond a standard seller? Alexis, you're saying yes.
Yes, there is. So obviously, the first thing that comes to my mind is the assumption, the VA assumption. There's a lot of conversation about that. We see this frequently in vetted VA. Sellers, if you are okay doing an assumption, great. But they have to understand the risks to that. Okay. So when I'm meeting with a veteran, whether it's an active duty service member or, like you mentioned, Josh, someone, a Vietnam veteran or something, it is important to kind of go over the strengths, the negatives, and the positives with the assumption. First, understand that the assumption, as we've gone over several times in vetted VA, the servicer, so the lender that currently owns the mortgage, is the one who is going to oversee that. The buyer has to go through that loan company to be pre-approved, and the timeline can vary. So going off what Claudia said, depending on where the people are going, where you're moving to, whether it's in town or out of town, out of state, an assumption can kind of take a while. Also, it's understanding the risk that your entitlement's tied to that house if a non-VA borrower purchases it. So that is something that definitely is different than a traditional civilian transaction.
And if you're interested in learning more about assumptions, either potentially getting one for yourself at the wonderful low rates that are out there the last few years, or potentially using as a seller, we did a big episode on that. Carmen Pincus, another one of our vetted realtors, she's actually completed 3 to 4 of them in the last 12 months. And a couple of things that she pointed out is in her market, there's several active bases in the area. So you have people PCSing in and out, and nearly everyone that she completed successfully was veteran selling to a veteran coming in. So to your point, Alexis, the benefit there was that they could substitute their entitlement and free up the seller's entitlement to go buy another property. She also mentioned that they took years off of her life. There's no lender involved in the process. So she got to be essentially the loan officer and the realtor and hold everyone's hand and guide them through the process. So in certain circumstances, it can work out and be a very positive experience, but there's definitely a lot of details there to cover. So if you're interested, go back and check out that episode. It was about 2-3 months ago. We went through that. So with that in mind, anything else that you think applies to a veteran seller versus an active duty seller? If not, I didn't think there was. So I think kind of when we're talking about the rest of this conversation of what an active duty seller needs to know, I think that's kind of the approach that we should look at here. You're looking at someone, what do they need to know when they're looking to find a realtor, and why is it important that they work with someone who's very familiar with the military and how the process works of them moving out of the area and needing to find a new property? You have any thoughts on that, Sam?
Yes. So agents, I've been seeing it a lot lately. We as agents, and I say we because I am one, right? And I have to include me in this, even though I don't want to. But they're desperate for business. And you have agents taking listings in areas that they don't even know how to pronounce the name, put it like that. So when you're talking to the agent, you want to confirm that they, one, either live in the area, work in the area, or have done business in the area, because it makes a difference when you're going to sell your home. I'm seeing it. I have friends who are listing properties 4 hours away, and I'm like, why? It goes against many things that us as realtors sign up for. And then if a problem arises, then that's just, your license on the line. So verify the information that the realtor is presenting to you, that they are familiar with the area, they know what they're talking about, when you're looking for one to help you list your property.
They also might not know local disclosures that you need to provide the buyer. Yeah. And if you're not using a local escrow company, or here in California, we use escrow companies, then nobody is providing that buyer with the local disclosures that they need.
That one always surprises me when we have one where there's an out of area listing agent and they end up wanting to use their escrow company. And you're like, you realize no one is within 100 miles of that company. I'm not sure why we would insist on that, but yeah, familiarity with the local area is really important. I think if it's someone active duty that is going through that PCS process, it's essential that you work with an agent that actually, they don't have to be former military or married to active duty or former military, but at least have been through it enough to know the process and know what you're going through. Alexis, why is that important? What benefits do you provide to a seller having been a veteran versus just a seller who may have listed a home for a veteran 5 years ago?
Okay, well, I'm a military spouse, not a veteran. Okay. But what I provide is, it's a sense of commonality. I know exactly what it's like to be in their shoes. So all the moving parts when you're PCSing, it's a little bit different PCSing than when you move for someone's job. All right. Not saying that you aren't forcefully moving when a spouse gets a job in another town or another state or in another country, but it's just a lot of moving parts. You want to make sure that you know everything you possibly can about the duty station that you're heading to, and also that you clear up any and all business locally where you are as well. Sometimes people forget that sort of stuff, parking tickets, even little things like that. You want to make sure that you have just a very smooth transaction. So having someone that understands the process because they've lived through it, I think is an advantage and something that's beneficial.
Absolutely, because there are, as you said, both on the loan side and the real estate side, we're literally 35% down on sale transaction volume. On the mortgage side, we're down 90% on refinances. So you can imagine there are people who don't have a lot of experience with these types of transactions who are eager to have a transaction, and it may not result in an optimal experience for you. So we already talked a little bit about pricing your home competitively and how important that is. Why don't you guys walk us through what sort of pre-marketing means before you get the property on the market? What are you doing with your sellers to maximize the likelihood of success? So Alexis talked a little bit about making sure the house is cleaned up, presenting as well as possible. Claudia, what other things are you doing with sellers in the current market to make sure that their home is going to present as well as possible once you do bring it to market?
Same thing. I mean, people underestimate how much a clean home really makes a huge difference in the photos, in the videos, all of that. I try to walk through my clients and give them a list maybe of things that they could do. A lot of times, though, they do ask if they need to paint, if they need to change the carpet, things like that, and it really just depends. Buyers' tastes are different. So if they went ahead and they spent thousands of dollars putting in new flooring, the next buyer might not like that. And sometimes some sellers don't have the ability to spend that money beforehand to do that. So it's really on a case by case basis about what I'm going to recommend for them to do and what they can do.
Is that what you're seeing, Sam? Similarly, just it's going to be totally case by case when you're walking through the home, what recommendations you're going to make?
It is, and one of the situations that I've had with a couple sellers over the last year or so, in the event that they're not making a lot of money on the sale and there's big items that need to be taken care of, spending that big money for you to not get the money, or basically evening out or possibly being in the deficit by spending 10 grand when you're only getting 5, it doesn't make sense. People always talk about stage a house. Not all homes need to be staged. Okay. That's about 3 grand or more, depending on the staging company that you use. There's some of us out here that stage, like Alexis, she staged some of her properties, probably not with big pieces, but stuff that's already in the house. So it's all going to be dependent upon the seller, what their net will be, and then what do they have available, to be able to do to get the home market ready. But back to what Claudia said, a clean home, people will love a clean home. Even if you got boxes everywhere, a clean home makes a big difference. I don't know how many homes I've been through recently that they stunk really, really bad.
Does that not help you sell the home when it has bad odors?
It does not help. Even if it's a beautiful house, if it stinks, the buyers are going to be like, oh no, we got to go, because it affects their walkthrough process. And people got allergies. Texas, if you ever been to Texas, if you don't have allergies, you will once you get here or you leave. One of the two. It don't matter. Allergies is bad. So when we're walking in these homes with these smells, it affects our noses, and then it's over.
Or cooking smells too.
Yes, I have one right now.
And pets.
Oh, pets, pet hair. Ooh.
Cigarettes.
Yes.
I think the greatest thing that somebody can do if they don't have the budget to do big things is just drive up to your house and take a look, try to see it in the eyes of the buyer. What is the first thing that the buyer sees? Is your door damaged? Do you need to repaint your door? Do you need to paint the eaves, the fascia, any of those things? Do you need to pull weeds? Whatever. That is the first impression that you're going to give everybody who comes to your house. So
I think on top of that, Claudia, the little things, when you can't do the little things, it starts making you wonder if they can't pull a weed out from the front of their porch, what else have they not been doing around here? Do you think they've been doing all the proper maintenance and upkeep and all the little things? I mean, I have a client who just bought 2 months ago, and I followed up with him the other day and we were talking, and his first comment was, I had no idea how hard it was being a homeowner, because he went through this long list of things he's had to do since he owned. As a renter, he did not have to do. But there are a lot of sellers out there that don't look at it that way. They go, I guess those things will wait until the next person buys this house and takes over those responsibilities. Alexis, why don't we transition from that to things you're doing ahead of time before the property hits the MLS, starts going out to Zillow and Redfin? What are the things that you're doing in the current market to market homes and make sure you're giving it the greatest opportunity to sell and sell as quickly as possible at the best price?
Okay. Well, for me professionally, and some agents, it is getting the home as ready as possible. So that's also going to include professional pictures and sharing coming soon. You can, depending on the MLS, this is going to vary drastically area to area. Every state has different real estate laws, as does every MLS. It's different in every area, but you could do a coming soon. Start letting people know, fellow agents in your office or agents that you just know in acquaintance. You can start sharing in social media groups for local community groups. Here on Facebook, most towns across America, there are local community groups sharing in there. So that's something that I like to do along the way, depending on the property. Sometimes I story tell online, kind of walking steps, what I'm doing, maybe staging, getting the house clean, prepped, ready. So that way it's kind of building up anticipation it's about to come. So those are some things that you can do. Again, I can't stress this enough. It's going to vary drastically area to area, depending on your state's laws.
I think one of the things you said there is really important, and something that sometimes home sellers and buyers can get a misconception. You talk about your networking with other agents, networking with people locally. Sometimes when a transaction gets put together in the same office, you'll hear someone say, oh, they're in cahoots. And it's like, no professional agent is going to try and short you as a seller what you can sell for. But maybe, Claudia, talk about why oftentimes in a tight market, a tight inventory market, two agents from the same office or two agents who are friends from another office who know something is coming. How is it that a home can get put together in a transaction like that based off of someone's network and still get a seller their highest and best sale price?
I think sometimes people forget that it's not just a sale, it's a relationship. And so this is relationships. So for me, for example, my broker is the largest broker in my area. We have 7 offices, over 150 agents. It's at some point, both of us are going to go to the same listing appointment. We're going to have buyers for the same listings. It doesn't mean that we're in cahoots with each other. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to jeopardize their license over their career for $5,000 or $6,000 commission check. That's just not realistic. But outside of that, having a good reputation, especially for us who work with a lot of VA loans, that's very important because there's a lot of listing agents out there who do not know the ins and outs of the VA loan. So when you have that experience and you can explain to them the benefit to the seller to accepting that offer, now you've gotten another supporter, and they're going to look at your offer with different eyes. Where if you don't have an agent who knows that and doesn't take that step to explain those things, they're just seeing the numbers and not the people behind the numbers. And I think that's what's important about making sure that you work with someone who has good relationships with other professionals. It's not that they're, trying to sell each other stuff. It's, I have buyers and I did my due diligence to ensure that they're approved, and the offer that we're sending you is a strong, solid offer.
I think the thing that's really important when I hear that, the thing that I like to point out is when you see realtors marketing materials, other than being the biggest agent, doing the most sales in an area, what is the number one thing agents like to brag about? They like to brag about having the highest sale in the neighborhood, the highest percentage of sale price to list price. So it's never a matter of, hey, it was easy to put this together with my buddy in the office. It's, hey, we're going to get top dollar in this current market, no matter who we sell it to. We might as well put it together with someone that has a great reputation, that we know we work well with, that we're going to be in the same office. We can talk about your transaction from both sides all day, every day. I don't know that I've ever been involved in a transaction where it seemed to be a negative. And I'm sure you guys can talk to this point as well. If someone comes to you and you say, hey, I'm going to have a listing in a week and a half, and they go, I got the perfect buyer for it. it is pretty rare that a seller says, yeah, don't put it in the MLS. We won't market it. We won't have open houses. We won't make it available. We'll just take that one. I mean, I know it does happen. A seller can just say, hey, I want smooth, fast, and easy. Let's get it done. But most of the times, Sam, would you say that most times your seller is going to want to get that on the market just so they can get a feel for what else is out there besides the one person in your office that may want to have a buyer?
Yeah, they'll definitely want to open it up just to kind of see what they get, and then if it doesn't work, then that one buyer becomes, the buyer. But they definitely want to test the waters and see what they get in the current market. Prior to this craziness over the last couple of years, it wasn't like that. If you got an offer, it doesn't matter if it was one person. We was writing contracts. So, yeah.
Well, let's transition from there. Besides using your network and something comes together real early in the process, you're getting ready to show the house. You're getting ready to do open houses. We went from a market where things were selling so quickly, no one would bother to do open houses. They would do one open house for 2 hours, make everyone come through and be as busy as possible. What, Sam, is that looking like right now for you in your market in terms of showing homes and having open houses?
Definitely showing a lot more homes in this market. Buyers have ample amount of, even though they're saying we have low inventory in certain areas, which we do, but that low inventory is specific to price ranges and price points. And that price point is affordable housing. We're missing that across the nation. So let's start there. So when it comes to showing homes, there's plenty of them on the market for buyers that are able to buy right now, right? But they're being a little bit more pickier in what they're wanting based off the availability. When it comes to open houses galore right now. Every weekend, every day almost, there's an open house. I have a buyer that's like, Sam, I'll just go to the open houses and I'll let you know which one I like. And I'm like, okay, but I still need to see the house. But they'll rather just go to the open houses because they're available instead of wasting time, because there's so many opportunities for the buyers right now that they're like, hey, I don't need you riding around all day. I'm going to the open house. I'll let you know when I like one. So open houses are crazy right now. They're left and right.
I think it's important for sellers to also know, though, the likelihood that the open house is going to sell your house is minimal. And, they also needs to be an understanding that the people that are coming through your home are not pre-approved. They might be, or they might not be, or they might be the neighbors who just want to see what you've done to your house, or they might want just some information about what they could sell their home for. So I think a lot of because we have a lot of open houses in my area too, but it's a lot of newer agents who are, that's a way for them to get out there, get some face time with potential buyers. So it's an opportunity for leads, but it's not necessarily going to lead into your home selling.
Claudia is 100% correct on that. In my listing and buyer presentations, I tell people open houses are for us as agents to get new contacts for buyers who's not represented. It's not 1% chance that it's going to sell your house. And I think it's actually less than that.
I do have to say, though, there was one time that a buyer walked into my open house. It was my listing, and he wrote an offer, and unfortunately, well, it closed, but his agent never showed it to him. That was, if he hadn't seen it at that open house, I don't think I would have had that buyer.
What are you guys seeing? I know that some sellers, like, it's a nuisance to them. They want to sell their house, but open house means I got to clean my house. I got to de-stink my house. I got to leave for 3 or 4 hours. Alexis, what does that look like in your market? Are most of your sellers wanting and expecting those open houses, or they look at it as, that's a pain in my butt, why do I have to leave my house?
Okay, so I'm not a big fan of open houses either. All right. But also, I don't want to sell myself here, but I'm just going to keep it real. I kind of put a lot of effort into getting my house, with the collaboration with the sellers, getting the house ready to sell. And they've been selling within a day or two, so there's not a need for an open house. Okay. But they're not my favorite. Open houses aren't.
In a way, they're a little bit antiquated from a time before. Like
Yes.
I had several family members a generation or two ahead of me that were realtors. And there was a time that people don't remember that the MLS was a book that got published like every 2 weeks. And it had like one little crappy black and white picture that no one knew anything about the house. They'd go, okay, it's 3 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,200 square feet. I know the address. I can drive by it and I can see this terrible picture. But now good agents are making sure there's 30, 40, sometimes 100 pictures online. Someone could get a real darn good idea by driving by and looking at those pictures, whether they may or may not be interested in that home
I don't
without
know
having to
about that,
wait for the
Josh.
events.
A lot of these pictures online catfish.
Yeah.
Okay, so
True,
what you're seeing
true.
online, this is like, you know,
Angles.
dating online. All right, when you're looking at houses, people are catfishing. Instagram models, filters times 100. Okay, so you cannot always go off of what you're seeing online. Also, what we've already kind of highlighted, pictures don't have smell-o-vision. Okay, so you don't know how stuff smells. Also, no one's going to take, it's just like us, right? I'm sitting here, makeup on, looking decent, right? Highlighting myself in the best possible light. I'm not showing you what's behind me over here in this corner. Okay, I got Marshalls and TJ Maxx bags. You know, people aren't showing that. They're not showing you how crusty their toilet is. And then there's like an unfinished, you know, DIY in a shower going on they haven't been able to use for 2 years. You know what I mean? So while you're talking about a lot of agents are putting all these pictures online, I'm sure people watching have probably encountered this where there's like 100 pictures, but there's no picture of the kitchen, or there's no picture of the bathroom, or there's no picture of the backyard. You're like, what's going on here? So it is always good to not just always pay attention to what you see in pictures, but get into the house, whether it's an open house, if it's available, or with a licensed real estate professional.
I think for the sellers who still live in the home, I think they're all about having an open house initially. And then after the open house, if they don't get an offer or there wasn't as much traffic as they had hoped, then they're like, I don't want to do that work again. We'll just do it by appointment. So, or, you know, if you have tenants, for example, because sometimes you might run into that, you could set aside a certain day. You know, if you know that it's going to be difficult to have showings during the week, then set them all for the weekend and have that open house. That is the only time that I would say do it that long and do an open house and keep doing it, is when you have challenges to having showings during the week or time schedules. You know, maybe the seller works at night or whatever the case may be.
So I think we've done a pretty good job of talking about how we're going to prepare the house, how we're going to show the house, make it available to people to see it either as a seller or a buyer. I don't know that on the show in a year and a half of doing this, we've really talked about both sides, what that negotiation process looks like. Writing an offer, presenting it, getting a counter offer back. And I know for myself as a loan officer, I will have my buyers all the time going, well, we made the offer. Well, we don't know what happens next, or what do we expect? And I'm sure you guys are going to tell everyone here in a second that it really depends on the other side. So we don't know. So, you know, sometimes everyone's going to get a response in 2 days. Sometimes they're going to drag it out a week. Claudia, what are you seeing in your market? If you're writing an offer up with a client today, when should they expect a response? What's a typical range of timeframes before they're going to hear back from a seller?
So it really is going to depend on the seller. In California, our purchase contracts have a expiration time by default. So it's 3 days. A buyer's agent can write in something different than that if they want an answer quickly. But the seller can absolutely take the entire 3 days if they wish. So I would always recommend, as a listing agent, if we get an offer on Friday or Thursday or Friday, that just gave us until Monday to have to give an answer. And I would rather go through the entire weekend to see if we get more offers. As a buyer's agent, I would not want to write an offer on a Friday because I know that the weekend is just starting and they're going to wait until Monday or Tuesday to present my offer. So I try to explain both sides to the buyer so they can see it from both sides. Because I know sometimes people think, well, we're the first offer, and really it really doesn't matter if you're the first. because
It's sort of, yeah, it's sort of like that negotiation. The first one to name a price loses. Well, the first one that goes in, they use you as leverage against other folks coming behind it. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have an opportunity. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But Sam, Alexis, in your parts of the country, pretty similar. Most people are getting out seeing homes over the weekend, writing up their offers, and maybe responses generally come towards the first part of the week. Is that fair to say?
It depends. Depends on the house and also the circumstances. So for my military clients PCSing in, sometimes time is of the essence. If they're in town for a house hunting trip, we don't have to wait 72 hours or 48 hours. So even though that's what the seller or their agent is requesting, I like to go in and say, hey, here are the circumstances. We kind of need to know an answer sooner than later. Let me know. Because if that house doesn't work out, then we need to hustle up and find another one. So it just kind of depends. But here in my area, we typically put a 24-hour offer expiration time on, and we anticipate to hear something back within 24 hours, unless the listing description states otherwise.
In Texas, there is no offer expiration. You can write that on your offer, and you'd be kind of out of line because we're not allowed to write it in. But it whenever the seller decides to make a response, I had a seller one time. New construction in an area that had no new construction. We was the highest price, but comps prove we could get that. And they literally rated a week we had multiple offers within the first 24 hours of it being on the market. She waited a week thinking she could get a better offer. And as the days went by, people started withdraw. And she didn't care. She was like, oh, I'm gonna wait. I was like, okay. So she waited, and the best offer went away, and she went with a mediocre offer that was left by the time she decided that she wanted to make a contract. So we don't have an exact time frame here in Texas now. And response time frame just came out as of February this year, where we have to respond within 48 hours or 2 days or something like that to a offer once the seller decides. But before it was, if you don't hear nothing, you just don't hear nothing, which that wasn't okay. But
then for Texas, is that response just an acknowledgement we received the offer, or do they have to reply and say yes or no to the offer within 48 hours?
You know what? It don't go into detail. So I'm gonna have to check that, because I know that they have to respond that they received it, but in regards to them accepting it, that's the question. I need to go back to my little screenshot and read that, but that's a good question.
For the people in California, I do want to add, if you put an expiration time less than the 3 days, they still might not give you the answer. But the reality is, we have low inventory. So if they come back and give you an answer on day 3.5 or day 4, are you really going to walk away from that? Probably not. So I think just to remind buyers to have some flexibility with that.
And this is important to see that every state, every area has a different policy when it comes to offers and expiration times. I mean, it's wild for me to hear that Texas doesn't even have anything.
No, at all. And it's annoying, but it is what it's annoying, especially when you got a seller that want to wait a week,
right,
to accept an offer. But in here it just says within 2 calendar days. It does not specify offer or email. It just says within 2 calendar days we need a response.
Well, your Texas lawyers are going to have to bone up. They usually write those things really precise and really specific, so no one can debate what they meant. They're a little loose with their language there. The thing that I was going to say is, for those of you watching at home and you're saying, I need a realtor to represent me as a buyer, I need a realtor to represent me as a seller, you're probably seeing at this point, among all of the hats that your realtor is going to wear, like amateur psychologist is probably the biggest one, both psychologist and negotiator, because it's not just you, it's potential seller, it's the other agent on the other side, escrow officers. If you have a title problem, might be a title person. They have to put on their best face when they meet an appraiser and try and present the property as well as possible. So really, that ability to get along with a lot of different personalities and to negotiate with everyone, because literally everything in here is a negotiation. It's not just price, it's timing, it's value on an appraisal. It's, can you get my client in to sign docs at 5 p.m. tonight before they head out of town and they're not going to be back for a week? Like, everything that you guys do really comes down to people skills and being able to get people to give you what you and your clients need throughout the process. So it isn't as simple as saying, well, this person does a ton of transactions, or they're local to my area, or my aunt just got her license. You really need someone that has that skill set. The next thing I had here on my list here to go through is the escrow process and appraisal and inspections. If you guys are cool with it, I think I want to skip over that, because we tried to keep these to an hour. We got about 10, 15 minutes left, and we could probably talk for an hour just on those things. And we've done episodes on them before. Something I don't think we've done a lot of detail on, and we're probably going to find that these vary by regions of the country as well, is contingency periods. So Alexis, on your Tennessee contracts, what contingencies do your buyers have in there, and what general timelines are you seeing? And what does that mean for a buyer? What does it mean for a seller? What do they need to be aware of in that first week or two of the transaction of what everyone's supposed to be doing?
Great. So we have to manually write all contingencies into the contract. So standard contingencies, especially for our viewers, most of them utilizing the VA home loan, is going to be an appraisal contingency. Can't waive that with the VA loan, obviously. And if you use other financing, FHA, VA, or USDA, FHA, conventional, or USDA, I highly recommend that you also have an appraisal contingency. But we have appraisal contingency, financing contingency, inspection contingency. That also includes a resolution period. So there is no standard time. However, I prefer to write 10 days for an inspection contingency period, and then 5 days for a resolution period. The resolution period is the time that the buyer and the seller can have after the buyer has satisfied all necessary inspections. They could come together and negotiate repairs. So yeah, now sometimes if the property has septic, well, something big going on, or we have bad weather, I might add more days onto that. So that's what we have here. Also in Tennessee, unlike other areas that some of my colleagues on here will get into, like Texas there, here in the state of Tennessee, a buyer can pull out during the inspection contingency period for honestly no reason. And that is something that sellers need to be aware of as well. Sometimes sellers think, oh, hey, we're in the inspection, they're doing inspections and they have an inspection contingency. They can only pull out if they don't like what's found during inspections. Not necessarily. Our forms kind of allow buyers an opportunity to get out really with no reason, as long as they're within that inspection contingency to which both parties have agreed upon.
What are the typical timelines in Tennessee for the appraisal and financing contingencies?
So financing contingencies, there is none. It kind of goes all the way to the very end, all right, to the very end of the contract. And same for appraisals. So it just kind of depends. I will say that most agents know the timeline for appraisals. For example, I just opened escrow on a house with a client, and we have a 21-day close. So as long as the appraiser can be out on time, during that timeline, we should be able to meet it. I have seen, though, some cases where appraisers can take their sweet time to come out. So there is no contractual deadline here in Tennessee when it comes to financial contingencies or appraisal. However, keep in mind that everything is negotiable. So if someone wants to negotiate and say, hey, we need to make sure you guys are clear to close within X amount of days, then the buyer needs to say yes or no to that.
Sam, before you tell us how Texas works, Claudia, why don't you talk us through the California residential purchase agreement, which we have hard-coded timelines in there, which you can then override. But why don't you walk us through those timelines for those contingencies and any other thoughts on contingencies you have? You're muted, Claudia.
Sorry. Our contracts by default give you 17 days. It used to be inspection was 17 and loan contingency was 21, but now everything is 17 days. The buyer's agent can write in a different time, or the listing agent can counter back with a smaller time frame, but by default it's 17 days. And that's 17 days to get your inspections done, whatever inspections there are, whatever reports you requested that the seller's paying for, and the appraisal. as far as the disclosures, the seller has 7 days to provide the disclosures to the buyer. And then the buyer has, again, that 17-day period to review everything that you've provided. If for whatever reason, and this might be like on a septic or on a well testing, if those come back after the 17 days, the buyer still has an additional 5 days after that to review those results. So you can write in different timelines, but that's what we have by default.
And it's funny, like when I hear that other states don't have a timeline in there, I found out my aunt was selling her house in Arizona a couple of years ago, and 3 days prior to closing, they said, "Oh, we don't qualify. We're canceling." I said, "What are you talking about? You've been in escrow for 30 days. How?" And you look at the contract, and sure enough, the Arizona contract, that finance contingency pretty much runs all the way to the end. Where we're here in California, I have a really short escrow, a 17-day escrow. They gave us 10 days on all our contingencies. We're 9 days in, and I had a listing agent all over me today. I'm like, "Lady, it's 9 days in. Can you give me a little bit of peace here?" And we did. We got our approval and we got our appraisal. But that's what I'm used to here in California. In 17 days, that's still, as for you guys sellers, that's a stressful period. You're worried, is it going to appraise? Is something crazy going to come up on the inspection? Anything. So I understand wanting to compress that timeline so that we're not going all the way out to the bitter end. But apparently in Tennessee, they don't agree. Sam, how does Texas compare to that?
Oh, Texas. No. So I am amazed that when I seen a contract just recently from California, when they had 17 days for everything, I was like, what in the world? But Texas, so for our inspection period or option period, you write in the number. So typically about 7 days right now is average. It used to be 10 back before the market got crazy. It can be longer in instances where you're going to need a septic inspection. If you know that there's some sewer issues and different things like that, we can extend it. Or you can start off with a 7 day and then we do an amendment to extend it with pay. So there's no set time frame. We fill in the blank. For appraisal contingency, we write in the blank. So we have to have an appraisal by there's no set time, but as far as like for the buyer to be able to back out if it doesn't appraise and this things like that, we fill in a blank. 18 days, 21 days. Typically in a hot market, we put 10 to 15 on that third party financing, getting that conditional approval from the lender. In regards to seller's disclosures, we try to submit that to the people up front because that isn't out for a buyer. So as a seller, you want to have that document immediately available to the buyers. So that way it's not a contingency that the buyer can use as an out. So we typically try to have that up front, but there is a block in the contract that says have not received, have received. If it's have not received, you can put so many days in order for the agent to get that to you. And in the event that they don't, hey, bye. In regards to what Claudia or Alexis, I don't remember which one was saying, during your inspection and option period, you can back out for any reason. It don't matter what it is, you can back out. After that inspection and option period, it is per the contingency. So if it's appraisal, if it's your approval financing, if it's the seller's disclosure, it's per that item. But within that first 5, 7, 10 days of the option period, that's when you get the back out for any reason at all, just because you didn't like the house and you decided to move on to another one. So we're very, yeah.
So another contingency that we haven't really touched on is if the buyer needs to sell their property to buy your listing, or if the seller needs to find the replacement home to move to after this one closes. So yeah, for us in our market, the buyer does have to submit a contingency of property sale form, and then the seller gives them a certain amount of time to get their property into escrow if it's not already. So a lot of times those offers might not get accepted. It just depends on the situation with the seller and if you're the only offer. But I wanted to mention that.
I had one that just closed today that it was contingent upon the seller finding a home, and to the market that they're in, there were only like 4 homes on the market. I'm like, this is a joke. Well, I don't know why we're putting the contract together. There's no way these people are going to find a home. And they actually did in about 2 weeks. I was very impressed by their diligence in getting out and finding a home. With that, Claudia, you had talked about the contingency for disclosures. Just talk briefly, explain to anyone watching what the seller disclosures are. I'm sure they're going to vary around the country, but in general, what is the seller disclosing to a buyer, and why is there a contingency for them to review and accept those disclosures?
So in California, we have about 40 disclosures. You don't necessarily use all of them in your transaction, but the most important ones are going to be things about the property, like the transfer disclosure, the seller property questionnaire. And it's basically the seller painting a story to the buyer of everything they know about the property, everything they've done during their ownership. And if they have any information from the previous owner, you can send that along too. If you still have documentation from when you bought your house, like disclosures, home inspection reports, it'll ask you all of those things. So it's a lot of information. And I always tell my sellers, it's better to disclose everything than the new owner talking to the neighbor one day and finding something out that you didn't put in your disclosure that maybe is not going to lead to a problem, but now they have a problem and they can go back and fault you for not disclosing everything. So
And you had mentioned the different acronyms, but we have in California, we have the agent visual inspection. So an agent is supposed to walk through the property and say, what can they see? You have the seller property questionnaire, which asks a bunch of stuff about the property. And you have the transfer and disclosure statement that asks, do you guys in Tennessee and Texas have that many different ways of disclosing what anyone could possibly know about a property?
Not here in Tennessee. We have a 5-page Tennessee property condition disclosure. And sometimes if the seller has not lived in that property for 3 years, then, or they've never lived in the property at all, they don't have to disclose anything. We have an exemption.
we have that too.
So yes, sellers really kind of here in Tennessee, buyers have to do their due diligence. Here in Tennessee, for example, no one has to say if someone passed away in the house. I know in California and other states, that's the thing. Here, if someone passed away, even from natural causes, you don't have to disclose it. Or if it was a murder suicide, for example, not to turn the subject south, but you don't have to disclose that. Nor do they have to disclose anything related to crime or if there's a registered sex offender nearby. So you really have to pay attention to the property conditions disclosure and understand how each state varies. I mean, I wish my state was as thorough as California, but I feel that it's a little general in nature.
So I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. My wife and I watch way too many true crime shows, and we were watching one the other night, and this little girl turns up missing, and they blew my mind. They looked at the sex offender database, and within a half mile of this little girl's house, there were 100 sex offenders. Now, granted, you can get on that list for little kind of bad things and then horrific things. So who knows what those 100 were. But how do around the country, what disclosures do sellers have to make about that? Or do they have to look this up? Is that on the buyer to do their own due diligence and hit those databases and see what's there?
In Texas, is buyer due diligence.
Yeah.
The seller does not have to disclose. They can have a sex offender in the house and they don't have to disclose it. I did want to ask you guys in regards to your disclosures and your seller's disclosures, is there a certain timeline that a buyer can come back and sue the seller, or is it doesn't matter at any point after the sale?
4 years.
Okay. What about you, Claudia?
You know what? I don't think that there is, as long as you disclosed everything, what is there for them to come back on?
So if it's not disclosed, so
if they
in
fail to
You run
disclose,
into the problem is when it's not disclosed.
so do you have a time frame for the buyer to sue the seller?
You know what? I'm not too sure. I'm gonna have to look that up.
Okay, so Texas,
I'm kind of second guessing myself on that 4 years now.
Yeah, so Texas, with our sellers disclosures, I try to tell my sellers to be as honest as possible because there is no time limit for us. If they 10 years later they find out that there was a something that was supposed to be disclosed that wasn't disclosed, a plumbing leak that XYZ, and it's costing them 50 grand, and now they want to sue the seller 10 years from now, they can. So the seller's disclosures, many people don't want to fill it out because it's 5, 6, 10, 20 pages, but we give it to you for that reason. And in the state of Texas, I can't tell you how to fill it out. I can't fill it out for you. You, the homeowner, have to fill that out. And you'll ask me, hey, what does this mean? Google it. Because if I tell you how to fill it out, it's on me. So,
and I think that's why. I was going to say, I think that's why in California we got the agent visual inspection disclosure. So the agent can say, I didn't live there, seller filled it out incorrectly. I walked through and noted everything that I could visually tell about a property, but it is a super, super gray area. What I would fall back to is if you're a seller, treat the buyer like your spouse. Always over disclose. Otherwise, there's no statute of limitations. It's coming back on you and it's not going to end good. So tell them the truth and tell them everything you know, or it gets ugly later on.
Yeah.
So we're here bumping up against it at about an hour. We've covered a ton of ground for buyers and sellers to know about how to work with the realtor, what realtors deal with, what they do on your behalf. So always like to go around the horn and give everyone last chance to any thoughts on anything we covered tonight or failed to cover, or just any tips or tricks that you have. So Alexa, since you weren't here last week, you were covered up for the tornado or whatever terrible Tennessee weather you were experiencing. You get to go first.
All right. So my ending notes are going to be this. If you're PCSing to a new duty station, please reach out as early as you possibly can to gather information from a local professional that's boots on the ground. And when you are PCSing from your current duty station and you're selling your house, then it's good to reach out to a boots on the ground local professional to go over all necessary steps to get your household in best timely manner for your family.
All right. How about you, Sam?
I think just basically research everything that is presented to you on both the buyer side and the selling side. And that's how you're going to protect yourself, because it is buyer and seller due diligence. At the end, realtors are not party to the contract. Lenders are not party to the contract. So make sure you're doing your research.
All right, Claudia, last words.
So just a couple of reminders for buyers, make sure you start changing the utilities over right before your closing. And then for sellers, make sure that you changed your address before closing, so there's no mail that you need to pick up. And be nice to everybody, because you're going to have to come back and get your mail if you didn't remember to do those things.
Absolutely. Be nice is always important, because I'm sure you guys all have a story where someone thought they were done with another person in the transaction, told them what they thought about them, and then 1 week, 1 year, 2 years later needed something from that person and said, hey, remember that time when you told me this, that, and the other? I don't think I want to help you. So I can tell you, I've had it in 27 years, 2 or 3 times where someone's put their foot in their mouth. So follow the golden rule, be nice. You never know when you will need something from someone. So again, thank you ladies for showing up here 2 weeks in a row, at least 2 of you, even though Alexis did have a good excuse with the weather. So appreciate you guys sharing your wisdom, your knowledge. For any of you out there watching, thanks for watching. We're here every week to ask and answer questions. Anything that is better, or you want a longer form answer than just the text answers out in the Vetted VA forum, show up here every Tuesday. I think we've got 1 more week, and then we're going to take a few weeks off, and we will be back. So again, thank you, ladies. I appreciate you taking the time with us tonight.
Thank you.